Dr. Nina Cerfolio is an associate clinical professor at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. She's in private practice in New York City and a nationally recognized psychiatrist and psychoanalyst specializing, excuse me, in mass shooting and terrorism. She integrates traditional psychiatry and spiritual training, sorry, losing my voice, to promote healing and mindful psychiatry. She writes and speaks on transcending emotional suffering. She's prominently featured in media, including the LA Times, the New York Times, Washington Post, NBC, and CBS. Her book, Psychoanalytic and Spiritual Perspectives on Terrorism, Desire for Destruction, published in 2023, explores terrorism roots and spiritual healing. Dr. Cerfolio has earned numerous awards and recognitions, and you will be talking on the subject, Voices from the Dark, what school shooters can teach us about prevention. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So basically what I'm going to be talking about is, can these school shooters be rehabilitated? And I've interviewed several of the school shooters that either it was thwarted or actually during the actual school shooting. In one instance, the man had a spiritual transformation and miraculously was transformed, and also miraculously wasn't shot by the SWAT team, and he let out hostages. But I guess what I'm going to talk about first is one case, which is Aaron Stark, who I interviewed. But first, I just wanted to say a few words that it's really, you can't really predict who is going to be rehabilitated and who isn't. We all work with patients, and sometimes when we start working with them, we think this is going to be a patient that the therapy is going to go smoothly, and the patient is going to make progress. And often what happens is that isn't really what happens at all, that there's periods of resistance and difficulties, and sometimes those patients aren't really able to make the changes in their life to have a better life. And then or I have had in my private practice patients that I think are going to be very difficult, and there's a lot of countertransference and also transference that sometimes you feel like this is going to be a patient that's going to be really difficult to engage in therapy and make changes. And those patients, for whatever reason, the therapy goes smoothly, and they're able to make transformations that initially I didn't think they would. So the whole point I'm trying to make is that it's really unpredictable to predict who of these young kids who are school shooters are going to be rehabilitated and who isn't. So, but most of this information that I'm speaking about comes from my original research on mass shooters, as well as interview with mass shooters, both thwarted and active. And I want to say that through my research and interviews with these people, that all of them, I would say almost all of them, and I tend not to speak in all or nothing, but the majority of them certainly said that if someone had simply listened to their cries for help, whether it had been their suicidal, homicidal, or delusions that the government had put a chip in their brain, and that was responsible for their auditory hallucinations telling them to kill. And, often most of these kids have obsessions with other mass shooters, and they have a shrine to other mass shooters above their desk. If anyone just one person had reached out and heard their cries for help, either for mental health or a psychiatrist, that it would have been enough to stop their violence. So these are really invisible, marginalized, discarded children by society. So in listening to their stories, I began to see some clear, consistent patterns of how healing and true change can actually happen. First of all, simple biology matters. The adolescent brain doesn't fully mature until a person reaches their mid-20s, which is when the ability to pause and control impulses finally takes root. Because of this growth, many of these mass shooters will look back at their teenage years and feel disconnected from the person they used to be. One of the school shooters that I studied, even Ramsey, who he was involved in the 1997 Bethel school shooting, he said that he really didn't comprehend fully that his actions would result in anyone being killed. He has a complicated history of abuse and neglect, but he also spent a significant amount of time on video games of killing and shooting people. But basically, this biological growth opens the doors to profound emotional breakthrough. Self-pity slowly melts away into genuine remorse, shifting their focus from their own childhood wounds to the agonizing pain they inflicted on others. Ultimately, this deep sense of regret and compassion forces them to take action. To carry the staggering weight of their guilt, they must find a way to serve. For some, that means mentoring others behind bars or teaching yoga to other inmates. For others, it means quietly monitoring dark corners of the internet to find and guide trouble kids who are considering violence and using their own broken stories to stop the next generation from choosing that destructive path. So I'm going to be talking first about Aaron Stark, who's someone who I interviewed, and he speaks out prolifically on social media about how a simple act of kindness stopped his mass shooting. He was either planning on being a school shooter or going into the grocery store that he would go in to buy food to be a mass shooter. So he grew up in an incredibly abusive family. Both of his parents were drug addicts, and there was no structure in the family of any sort. He was homeless by the time he was 15. His family actually kicked him out. He had attended 40 different schools, I think, by the time he was 13. And I should say that most of these school shooters, most of these mass shooters that I've worked with and studied have higher IQs than the judges, the doctors, the teachers that they interact with. So with Aaron, he's a really high IQ. And often, this isn't the case with Aaron Stark because he wasn't psychotic. He wasn't hearing voices telling him to kill, but he was homicidal, suicidal, and he did have depression. And he never really received any type of formal mental health care throughout his adolescence, despite being homicidal and suicidal. So he told me that he endured endless bullying in school, extreme poverty, and he would cut himself as a way to release pain. And I guess at one point he was cutting himself, and his mother came in, and he asked her what he should do, and she said that he should buy sharper razor blades to cut himself deeper so that he would be successful in killing himself. And he said that he was so filthy and dirty that when he sat down, there would be a black cloud of, I guess, dirt and just he was so filthy because he was homeless that when he would sit down, there would be this dark cloud of smoke that would erupt from him, which also obviously alienated him from others. So basically, he went to say goodbye to his neighbor. He was planning, as I mentioned, either to be a school shooter or go to the grocery store to be a mass shooter. And the friend said, something doesn't look right. Something doesn't look right in your eyes. You need to come in, you need to take a shower. And he gave him also a sandwich. I guess this neighbor at some point had allowed him to sleep on his couch when he was homeless. I guess various friends at times took him in. And he said just this one act of kindness was enough to stop him from becoming a school shooter. So it really kind of, to me, it's really interesting how someone who feels totally hopeless and helpless just from one act of human kindness can feel like an inkling of hope, and how that can radically change their life. So I have two personal experiences that I wanted to share with you. One was in high school. So I went to a private school where there was many resources, although I would say the general student body wasn't very happy because an all-girls school had gone co-ed with an all-boys school. And when I was a sophomore in high school, this girl who I wasn't friends with, she was overweight. Looking back, I think she probably was bipolar. She had like mood swings, and would be at times very manicky, but I wasn't friends with her. I really didn't know a lot about her, but I was rushing to class and she said, I want to show you something. And I was about to tell her, I don't have time, but I looked in her eyes. I saw something wasn't right. And I was like, okay. So she insisted on going into the girls' room and into a stall in the bathroom. And she pulled out her father's loaded gun. And she asked me, giggling hysterically, kind of manicky, what should she do? And I think partly maybe why she approached me was I was sort of a depressed, angry kid too. Although I always did well academically and I was always involved in sports. But I just, I told her that she, I empathized with her first. I said, kids were not nice to her. They bullied her, they ostracized her. And her brother was in my class. And I think in looking back, he actually had early onset schizophrenia. So he would hallucinate. He would talk to himself. At times I tried to talk to him and he would answer me in non sequiturs and it wouldn't make sense. And kind of breaks my heart because in looking back, I feel bad that I didn't intervene with him, that I didn't bring him to the psychiatric emergency room and make sure that he was seen by a board certified psychiatrist and wasn't, properly diagnosed and maybe put on medication that could have made a difference. But he was never properly psychiatrically taken care of throughout our 4 years of high school. So that was her older brother. So clearly something was also going on in that family. I'm not really sure what, but anyhow, I told her, I said, look, I know that the other kids aren't nice to you, but you need to take the gun back and you need to, lock it up and you need to leave it alone. And she did that. And I often wonder if I had said, colluded with her and said, let's express our anger and let's go out there and show them, if there hadn't been a different result. So I use that example because I think it really shows that if you take the time to care with these kids, it can be that simple. It doesn't have to be really that complex. But it still haunts me to this day. I don't know what happened to either one of them. And I wonder also what happened to her brother, because there were resources there for him to get the help that he needed, but he never did in high school. So, and then the other personal instance I have of stopping a school shooting is a patient of mine who I've seen for many years. She's a teacher it's a second biggest high school in the United States. It's in Brooklyn. There are a lot of illegal immigrant children that attend the school. There's also a lot of Palestinian students that go to school there. But I, treat her for, well, actually, I don't want to say. So just for confidentiality reasons. But anyhow, she had never called me with an emergency in the many years that I treated her. So when she called me with an emergency, I knew it was a real emergency. And she said she didn't know what to do, that there was a boy in her class who was an illegal immigrant from South America who was threatening to shoot up this high school. And, he was basically being, which is always the story over and over again with these cases, that he was being ignored, he was being bullied by the other students. The other teachers and students were afraid of him, so they ostracized him, and she didn't know what to do. And I told her that if he came back into the high school and he said that he wanted to shoot the school up, that he was homicidal, that someone, her or the guidance counselor, the principal, or someone needed to bring him emergently to the nearest hospital to be evaluated by a board certified psychiatrist. And if he was still homicidal, he needed to be admitted against his will until he wasn't. So what happened was she developed a relationship with him. So basically he was just coming into school for food because he didn't. So he had come into the country with his older brother. His older brother was in a gang and had access to guns. And their parents were not there. I also told my patient to try to call, to find out if there was an adult that was responsible for taking care of them. They didn't even have a working number to call. So it was just him and his older brother, who was in a gang, who had access to guns, and the kid was primarily coming into school to be fed. So I just told her, you have to form a relationship with him, which she did. She's a great teacher. She when he came to school, she would take him to the pantry, get him extra food, feed him. She put him in front of her classroom, as opposed to everyone, all the other teachers. He was sitting in the back of the class and was not engaged with what was going on, obviously, because this kid was just trying to survive. And she tried to put really supportive, empathic students around him. So, it's just that one act of her having a nurturing relationship with him that seemed to turn everything around. Excuse me, where he wasn't saying he was he wasn't saying he wanted to shoot the school up anymore. And basically that just the one, her forming a nurturing, caring relationship with him seemed to have really stopped his revenge for feeling humiliated. So she eventually found out, I'm not exactly sure how. I think I had told her, to try to get any background information from the other school, because often what happens with these kids is that the other schools will kind of try to unload them on another school when they're problematic, because they don't have proper resources either for mental health or to take care of kids that are really homicidal, suicidal, psychotic. Although this child was not psychotic, he was just he was homicidal. And she found out that apparently in that school, he had also threatened to shoot the school up. And the school had admitted him against his will to a psychiatric inpatient ward, where we couldn't get information how they treated him, with what medication, but that he was stabilized to the point that he wasn't homicidal anymore and he was discharged. So it's so important, and I see this over and over again in all the cases I studied, that there's not only is there not communication between the schools with psychiatric history or homicidal, suicidal history, but that even in the school, like between teachers and the guidance counselor and mental health workers, there's not a lot of communication. Or with parents that are, most of these kids come from families where there's intergenerational trauma, there's substance abuse, there's addiction, and they're not really able to know how to take care of themselves, much less their children. So engaging their parents to try to provide minimal help, and minimal help in my mind is getting them the mental health care that they need, especially when they're hearing voices telling them to kill, and they've tried to kill themselves numerous times and kind of nothing is being done. So the parents also need a lot of support. So like family therapy, engaging the parents as well, because often the child is the identified patient, is really, really important. So those are two personal experiences that I had that kind of reinforced what Erin Stark said, was just that a simple act of kindness from a neighbor, a friend who had let him stay on the couch, take a shower, and give him a sandwich, stopped his desire for revenge. And it totally changed his life. And now he's prolific on social media. He talks out about the need to reach out to these kids who are disenfranchised and isolated. And he goes on the dark web and he'll see kids that are like planning school shootings or a school shooting, and he'll reach out to them and he'll try to develop a relationship with them and engage with them and, deter them from becoming a mass shooter. So, yeah. And it is interesting, how that sense of hopelessness, and we work with patients so often that suffer from feeling hopeless and helpless, but how sometimes just a simple act of kindness can give someone some hope. Just, I guess, in the sense that, humanity, that there's humanity out there, that someone actually cares, that can really transform their life. So I have another example, but I guess really what I wanted to talk about first is how we invest, unfortunately, in hardware. So we have these simulated school shootings, which is done by law enforcement, where they have teachers sometimes actually carrying guns, not loaded, and students will be assigned like a mass shooter role or a dead role or an injured role, and they simulate an actual school shooting in the school, and they have invested in like the desk comes up to be a bulletproof desk. They have the glasses will be the windows of the classroom will be bulletproof. It's a billion-dollar industry now that we've invested in our high schools to have these simulated school shootings, which have really only been successful not in deterring school shootings, but actually informing would-be school shooters like where there's vulnerable sites and where it's best to be a school shooter. And it also traumatizes not only teachers who are already overwhelmed with their duty not only to teach, but to really to provide, like in the instance of my teacher, she had almost become a psychiatrist to this boy who didn't have parents, a legal immigrant, didn't speak a lot of English initially when he showed up, and was primarily just coming to school to be fed. And she has full class of kids, and it's not fair to the teachers to put upon them, like they're not trained in mental health. They don't really know how to do that, and yet that's what we're asking them to do. So instead of investing in these hardening our schools with becoming war zones and battlefields, that why can't we invest in putting more mental health workers within the school and getting these kids the care, or at least identifying them to get the care that they need, if it's not within the school system but within the community itself. And many studies have shown that hardening our schools doesn't work to stop any of the violence. And since 2020, gun violence is the number one killer of children under the age of 18 in our country. And as a civilized country, we are way number one in gun violence. And in my mind, we can do much better in preventing this just by reaching out to these kids and showing them that someone cares. And most of these kids are getting, they do get radicalized online. And they feel that they're discarded by society, and they get this distorted sense of belonging on these various websites. Like one of the online subcultures is known as saints culture, which worships mass shooters as if they were subhuman gods. It teaches vulnerable kids that a high casualty attack is a shortcut to permanent legendary legacy. So these kids are feeling, and most of them are boys, although there are women, girls shooters, but the majority are boys. So often they feel impotent, they feel emasculated, they feel humiliated. So their way of being seen is in how many people that they can kill, and overcoming the kill count to give them a sense of being potent or being visible and mattering. So it's this distortion that in my mind is so easily changed if just someone gives them any simple direction, or just showing that someone cares. I guess I also should say that in my research that the majority of these mass shooters that we studied had been suffering from undiagnosed schizophrenia, and that often, if they survive and then they go to jail and then they get put on the proper medication, which is antipsychotics, that they are no longer hearing voices telling them to kill, they're not homicidal, suicidal, and it turns their life around. So one of the cases that we studied and is he was a high school shooter, at the Thurston High School shooting. He had what we felt to be early onset schizophrenia. He was hearing voices telling him to kill. He felt he had a chip in his head, and that chip was the government had, the CIA had put a chip in his head, and that was responsible to why he was hearing voices. He had 3 distinct male voices. One told him he was a bad person. Another told him every thought he had was toxic. And the third was commanding him to kill. He had told his parents about him. So in this case, he had a loving, what appeared to be a loving family. Both his parents were Spanish teachers in high school, loving to a certain degree, I guess I should say, because when he told his dad that he needed to see a psychiatrist, the father refused to bring him to a mental health worker or a psychiatrist, and told him, threatened to send him to military school. So there was this family stigma of mental illness. So on both sides of the family, there was a history of schizophrenia, but they felt a sense of shame and humiliation that there was this family history of schizophrenia, and they didn't know how to deal with it, even though they were educated. So they at some point did bring him to a psychologist, but they withheld family information of his family history on both sides of schizophrenia. And I don't think that, so I'm going to use his name, even though I don't like to use to name these people, but he has actually spoken to the media since. I've actually tried to talk to him. I've been trying to talk to him now for 3 years. He's in Oregon State Prison. He's an adult now. And it's very difficult to talk to these prisoners for various reasons. Anyhow, so Kip was seen by a psychologist. The family did get him in to see a psychologist, and but they withheld family history of schizophrenia. I'm not sure what happened, because I didn't have access to whether he withheld hearing voices telling him to kill. But often with most of these mass shooters, they do not divulge that to treating mental health workers, to judges. Often if they survive, most of them don't survive, they're killed. But if they do survive, they withhold that to judges and attorneys. And I think this is a sense of shame and stigma of mental illness and being out of control. But he was basically put on an antidepressant. and antidepressants lower the seizure threshold. They also lower the seizure threshold, but they lower the threshold for psychosis. So in my mind, I don't know what happened, but I worry that on an antidepressant, when he was a kid hearing voices telling him to kill and he was delusional, that it probably made his psychosis worse and his delusions worse. And basically, the story with him is an incredibly hopeful one because, well, not in terms, so he killed both of his parents, and then the next day went to school and I think killed like 4 kids, injured 8, and somehow miraculously wasn't killed himself, went to jail. And the irony is with most of these people who do survive, even though our penal system is not known for its humanity or providing good mental health care, they get the mental health care they need, and he did. He was put on an antipsychotic. And again, a really smart, really bright kid, got his GED, is a voracious reader of all like the classical literature, got his BA in classical literature, has a spiritual practice where he begs for forgiveness for what he did. He's horrified that he killed his parents and other classmates and injured other classmates, and has a spiritual practice within the prison. He teaches yoga to other inmates, and he's also the head electrician. So it's this radical transformation that, in my mind, has he been given proper psychiatric care and medical treatment, could have been averted. And it's a stigma that we see over and over again with these parents feeling shame, humiliation. Is often made worse if they come from a different country, as in the instance of the Virginia Tech shooting. The parents they came from South Korea. And again, in that instance, I think he was suffering from early onset schizophrenia. And in the Korean culture, they believe that a mental illness is a mortal sin. And it's also, it means you have bad blood. So there was so much resistance of his parents getting him help. And again, he was bullied, isolated, felt emasculated, and became actually, that is he was the most prolific, it was in college in Virginia Tech, a college shooter in US history. I believe he somehow survived. No, he didn't survive. I don't know. So many of the cases are so similar that they blend together. I think that he was killed. I think he was killed by, I think he killed himself, actually. Either he's killed himself or what they all plan is suicide by cop. So that's where they all plan the school shooting that they're going to be killed. But his teachers were afraid of him. Apparently, he had been reported and had gotten some mental health and was hospitalized briefly. But the way that the laws are written in this country is now swung to the rights of the patient. And even though he was mandated to get psychiatric care against his will, a judge let him out after 3 days of an involuntary admission. And then he went back to become the shooter. And it was all these, he fell through so many loopholes. Like there were legal loopholes he fell through within the college. The teachers had reported him like acting bizarrely to other female students, like he was taking pictures of other female students' legs under the desk. He had told one of his roommates that he was having this relationship with a woman that didn't exist. So he clearly was delusional and psychotic and homicidal and suicidal. And no one seemed to know what to do with him. And if someone had just, in my mind, they were all kind of afraid of him, I think, and wanted to avoid him. But if someone had just, I think, reached out and connected more with him and brought him to get psychiatric care, I wonder if there couldn't have been a different outcome. So I'm gonna stop talking and just open it up to questions. So
We don't want for you to stop talking.
I mean, I can
It's
talk on and on.
it's fascinating, fascinating, fascinating
It's
to enter their world, you know.
yeah, and everyone's so afraid of it. I don't know, it just takes one person engaging. Like, I guess, I was always counterphobic, so I went into what I was fearful of. So I should just tell people I wrote a book and as part memoir. I survived 2 terrorist attacks. I
Mm, mm,
was a first responder at 9/11. I lived like so I live in Greenwich Village. I have an apartment in Greenwich Village, although now I'm up in Rockland County. But anyhow, then I was in the city and I ran. I was a big endurance athlete. I would run down to the World Trade Center around the east side back home, 10-mile loop. Anyhow, when 9/11 happened, I went down to help. And as a consequence, I did help people, thankfully. But as a consequence, I did have developed breast cancer. I had a mastectomy. And then I've done humanitarian work all throughout the world. And I did humanitarian work in the Chechen genocide in 2005. So it's
wow.
exactly what is happening in Ukraine, but it was
Mm,
in Chechnya. Chechnya was always trying to break free from Russia, and they're Muslim, so they're othered basically. But the news didn't really report on it, and at the time we joined forces with Putin to fight terrorism because they were Muslim. And so I went there to provide medical care to a lot of the refugees. And also, we eventually got into Grozny, which is the capital of Chechnya. And the only reason we got in, and the only reason we got into Chechnya, because there was a KGB agent who was with us the whole time, who I knew right away was a KGB agent, even though he reported to be a sports reporter. And I think because I was providing medical care to Chechens, and eventually I was with a running group, Achilles, which is a disabled running group. We were able to get 3 of the boys out for medical care for a 6-week stay in the United States, but for whatever reason, he poisoned me, and
mm,
I almost died there. So I'm very counterphobic. So I guess when the girl in my high school approached me, I didn't have any qualms with, going with her into the bathroom to find out what was wrong. That's just kind of the way I'm programmed. But I suppose a lot of people probably would have avoided it. She was scary. She was kind of a scary girl, but I wasn't scared. So I'm counterphobic, and it paid a price for it, but that's just the way I am. But to me, it's just one. My teacher, great teacher. She's not counterphobic. She just was loving to this boy,
mm.
and that stopped it. So